Hello YouTube and welcome back to episode 4 of A Railway Empire. This is Intro Aether. At the end of the last episode we tidied up this little piece of track here that runs into our New York station, and I'll quickly show you how I placed the signals. So you've got to imagine that this piece of track will eventually be double tracked, and then as a train comes into New York it will split to the left or the right of these three pieces of track, and the middle bit here is just going to be a dummy piece of track which we will eventually end up using, but not quite yet. So we're going to unpause. We need to get a little bit more cash. We just need to in actual fact we can do that now. We'll just finish off this piece of track here. That will allow us to run a train on this line. There we go. So once we've got the money we'll run a passenger train to Albany. Some of our trains will have completed their journeys now, so if we look on the left hand side we can see that we've got some good numbers, and what's important to note here is the passenger train between Baltimore and New York seems to be doing a roaring trade. Average balance per week of 6,800, which is by far our best. So I just want to double check that we have got our train personnel on that train. Because as I said in the earlier video, you want to try and make sure that you put the bonuses onto the trains that are making the most money, and that way you'll make the most of the staff member bonus. Now the cattle trains that I thought were going to be doing really well aren't making as much as just our bog standard freight trains. So the staff member, the security guard, we're going to remove from the Baltimore cattle, and we're going to put our staff members that are giving us a bonus to freight on the freight lines that run between Baltimore and New York. And that will just increases the profits a little bit. You find a lot of the things you do on this game, they only increase the profits like marginally by themselves, but when you add them all up, obviously then it becomes more of a, you actually see the results. So New York is still continuing to grow. We're up to almost 67,000 now, but I do expect this fulfillment of demand to drop below the 60% threshold soon. As the city grows, it starts to demand more and more goods. And of course, unless you've got other cities that are also growing that are starting to produce those goods, then you do get sort of this New York City will get ahead of the others as such, and as such we're not going to be able to meet the demand. So this will go stagnant for a little bit. We're going to have to try and grow Baltimore and Albany, and then as these two towns grow they can then start producing the goods that New York now needs, and it's like a sort of catch-22 situation really. So we've got a train up here. Like I say, the wheat being delivered into New York is a little bit saturated. We sent out 3 trains right on the bounce, off the bounce from the start there. So it will take a little bit of time for everything to catch up. Right, so we've got enough money now to set our train up from New York to Albany. So this is going to be a passenger train, and we will do this via the manual mode again. So we are going to be using platform 1s. We want to leave with at least 8 carts worth of passengers, and the same coming back from Albany. We only have 1 platform on track up there, but once we do expand and have 2, we will again be using platforms number 1. We want to add a dining car, and again this gives us a ticket revenue boost. And that's that one set. So that can now start running. So we're just waiting for the New York to Baltimore passenger train to turn around and head back towards Baltimore before our new train here will spawn. So we are going to want to double track this as soon as possible. We can actually plan that now, and then we can just put the game into double speed whilst we accumulate enough cash to buy the line. You'll notice when I do these switches, I tend to be quite specific as to where they're placed. I'm trying to use the least distance, because as I mentioned earlier, the larger the distances of the switch, the longer it takes for trains to pass through the switch. Right, so it looks like we're going to need about 50,000 to finish that line off, and then we can add a few more trains and they can start making money, and it will be an accumulative effect where we'll be able to get to Syracuse and Buffalo pretty quickly, I think, once we've got this line set up. Another interesting thing to note with regards to the demand of a town is that each item that the town demands has the same weight. As in, we currently want 1.2 units a week of corn and only 0.6 units per week of alcohol. But if we supply either of these numbers, you get the same bonus to the fulfillment of demand. It's not as if this 0.6 only makes up a third of the total, because this one is, you know, double the value. So you can kind of use this to your advantage when you get, you know, a really big city. You're going to want to focus your efforts on supplying these items at the bottom of the list, because the town doesn't need as much of them, but it still gives the same. It still has the same value when it comes to increasing the fulfillment of demand. And of course, by supplying these items, you're going to be using less trains. You'll have less turnaround time in stations. Trying to supply corn, wood, and meat, you can see that you've got to get 3.6 units per week in and out of the station. Whereas for the same, for the same value, you could get clothing, lumber, and alcohol, and you'd only have to supply 1.8 units per week. So when we get a really big population in New York, we're almost certainly going to be making use of or abusing that sort of theory. But we don't have to worry about that quite yet. We do want Albany to start growing when we get up here. Once we start shipping meat there, it should be fine, and obviously we will be bringing some grain in, because there is another brewery in Albany. Just going to quickly check the meat production down in Baltimore. Okay, so we have had a few weeks where it looks like we've been low on cattle. I really want this line to be a solid 100%. So yeah, we don't have any meat for export, so it's not as if the city is overflowing with it, which is why production has slowed down. So we're almost certainly going to be wanting to add another cattle train. As long as this industry here is having sort of periods of time where it dips below 100%, it basically means that there's profit available on this line by adding another train. We are also going to be transporting the meat from Baltimore into Albany as soon as we have this part of the track double tracked. We can do a quick calculation to see if we're going to be able to handle that. We can see that Albany requires currently 0.5 units of meat. New York is currently 1.2, so that's 1.7 total. And Baltimore, 1. So we've got 2.7 units per week total that we need to be supplying. And the industry down here produces 2.4. So we're kind of a little bit stretched on the meat front. It would be handy if this meat factory was to upgrade. And I think as long as we keep this figure up here above, certainly above sort of 60, 70, 80%, then we will see this meat industry level up. Right, so we've got enough money now to lay this line. So let's quickly do that. So we now have a double track line, and we can start flooding this line with trains. I'm wondering how to do this up here. That's fine, we'll just have to... We will be upgrading this station. I'm just thinking the way this is at the moment, we've got a big distance between this station and where I'm going to be putting these signals. and that will increase the turnaround time on this station. But for the time being, it's only one platform, so we shouldn't expect too much. Why is the auto signal not working? For some reason it didn't want to let me select an auto signal. Now I'm going to put a signal here. I wouldn't normally do this because it's, you know, it causes the potential for a train to stop here if the line gets clogged up behind it. But this line isn't going to be that busy for the time being, and we do want a train that's waiting here to dock into this station to get on with it as soon as this train has moved out of the way. We don't want a train heading north here to have to wait until the train heading south has reached all the way to this point. For some reason it's not letting me place the auto signals. The second I press the control button, the track is turning red. Doesn't make any sense at all. I'll do them manually for the time being. I can't figure out why that is. So we'll quickly add these in. It'd be handy actually if I could let the game run while I'm doing this, but unfortunately you can't. Right, so that's our signal sorted. I would imagine actually we're gonna add another train onto our cattle line here first. We can also do the same thing in New York. We can click on the brewery and just have a look at what production is like, and you can see that utilization of the brewery here is 100%, just how we want it. And of course that's why our trains are waiting up here to take the grain in, or the wheat as I like to call it. That's because New York is currently flooded. If we go into our demand, we can see that it has a lot of grain. Once it reaches a certain number, it won't accept any more. And as we're telling our trains to leave with 8, then obviously we need a space for 8 units. Right, so let's pause. Let's double up our cattle line here and make another one of these. So we'll just quickly clone that. So that hopefully should keep up with our demand for cattle in Baltimore. We'll check that again in a month or two. Once that train that I've just added has completed its journey and everything's settled down, we will check that again. Our passenger train between New York and Albany has just docked. Yeah, and that's now loading to come back. So we're going to double that up. When I first set the trains up in the first video, I done like one from New York to Albany, or as an example, and then the other one would be from Albany to New York. That's just to space the trains out. If you do one line and then clone it, they kind of leave directly behind each other, which I don't think is the best way to do it. As this train up here, the New York to Albany train, is all the way up at this station, we are just going to clone it because it will be spawned down in New York, and then the distance between the two will be perfect. So let's go ahead and clone that. So next we need to think about getting some wheat into Albany. And because of the nature of our wheat trains currently waiting for New York, I think what we'll do is we'll just quickly direct one of these. We'll amend this. We'll remove New York from its destination. And just for the time being, we'll add Albany in. Now, we will have to keep an eye on the industry in New York, the brewery, because obviously by removing this train from that circuit, it might be that we're not shipping enough wheat into New York. But our trains are currently waiting to load at the Collins Estate station there, so we can afford to move this one for the time being. So Albany, wheat. In actual fact, I've done that with the worst train possible. Let me just change this one back. I should choose the train that's in the station, because of course otherwise this one now has to wait. As we had earlier, it'll have to wait for probably a month before it makes its way. So let me quickly change this back. Set up rail line. We no longer want to go to Albany, we're going back to New York. And therefore we're going to quickly change the name. That's handy, I didn't even have to type it. And then the train that we're going to amend is going to be this one. So we don't want you to go to New York. We're going to be going to Albany. Certainly looks very pretty, this game. So I'm kind of debating whether to do what we've done with our line between New York and Baltimore. As in, sort of flood the line with trains, because that gives us the best return of investment in the least time. Or whether we're just going to crack on and go straight to Syracuse and Buffalo to make a start on that task of transporting our passengers. Now I see a little symbol on the screen here, a connection bonus, or it's a bonus for a new industry in Jacksonville, which is completely in the middle of nowhere by the looks of it. Fulfillment of demand 39%. It's not really the place you want to be spending your money setting up an industry. What could we build here? We could build a meat industry. But that wouldn't be a very good idea because there's absolutely no cattle anywhere near it. The nearest cattle is all the way up here. So we're going to be ignoring this. Not for us. Who is this blue guy? Smythe. We'll let Smythe build an industry down there. He can waste his money. Having a look here at the competitors, we can see that we have now jumped into the lead. We've got the most trains in use by a mile. Considering that we've got a very hard AI level, I think the AI probably is a little bit slow in expanding. Some people think it expands too fast, and maybe that's true in the middle game. It does certainly all of a sudden seem to, once the ball gets rolling for the AI, it does seem to expand rather quickly. But you can see at the beginning here we're crushing it. Right, so we're starting to get breakdowns now, and this is something I really wanted to avoid. I talked about it in the previous videos. You get a breakdown and then you're going to have a whole bunch of trains sort of clog up the track behind it, and then the natural spacing of trains that are going in and out of the station gets disrupted. So we're going to be wanting to place maintenance sheds as soon as possible. Now, maintenance sheds are kind of a bit of a pain really, because although they do reduce the number of breakdowns your trains have, which prevents the problems of the lines getting blocked up, it also means that the trains are docked in the station for longer whilst they get repaired. So what I will do eventually is I will place a dummy station, say in this position or somewhere around here, and then what we'll have our trains doing is, as opposed to getting maintenance in the main town, we'll set up the route so it goes from Baltimore to New York, back to Baltimore, back to New York. Then it's going to pop into the warehouse, have its maintenance with no passengers on, and then it will leave to go back to Baltimore with no passengers. And at that point it will then complete its loop again. And by doing that we'll get the maintenance off of the main line, and that will allow for a faster turnaround in the station. And that will mean that we can import and export more goods per week, which is basically what the crux of the game is. As I say, I've mentioned that now, but we probably won't be doing that for a while. We're going to need quite a bit of money to set that up, and then it's going to take a long time to set up all the train routes. With the rural stations we will have maintenance sheds here. The reason being, we can afford to expand this track and then, expand this station, have 3 or 4 platforms, and then we can spread our trains out, and then it doesn't really affect the fact that the trains are going to be in the station a little bit longer, because we'll have 4 tracks to serve, say, 7 trains, and that's going to be plenty. Unlike this particular line here where we've got 8 trains, it's going to be getting quite busy. So we have our 2 passenger lines going up to Albany. We have 1 wheat train going that way. We really need to start moving some meat up there. That will grow the town, and that will allow us to have different industries up there. Hopefully we're going to get a cloth making factory. That's really going to be helpful, because then we can start feeding New York and Baltimore with the cloth. Then they can produce this clothing, which is in turn going to help the town grow. So our freight train, there's really no point in running a freight train between New York and Albany. New York would only be exporting the clothing, because obviously Albany already has a beer factory, so it's not going to want to import any beer, but it is going to want to import the meat. So that's going to be the next train line that we set up. It's going to leave Baltimore, go to Albany. We're going to set it up as a freight train. Platform number 2, prioritise meat. In actual fact, I won't prioritise this, and just because if we do have an extra industry pop up in Baltimore, we don't want to have to remember to come in here and then say click on the log icon. We'll just leave it as it is. Albany isn't going to be requiring clothing or leather for the time being, so we'll just concentrate on transporting the meat. So once again, we want 8 carriages. Oh, actually no, we don't. We don't do this with the freight trains that are running from A to B. We do on the rural stations, obviously, because as I just mentioned, we can afford to leave them at the rural station a bit longer. We don't want to have our trains here sort of clogging up the main line for too long, or clogging up the station for too long. So they can kind of take what's available, but they're not going to specifically wait around for it. So once again, it's going to prioritise beer, because we have it on freight only, therefore mail isn't selectable, nor is passengers. So very much like our New York to Baltimore freight lines, this is going to be doing the exact same thing. It's going to be transporting beer from Albany to Baltimore, and meat from Baltimore to Albany. Obviously this is a longer distance track, so it might be that 2 trains isn't enough. We might have to add 4 in, but we will have to monitor how busy our station is getting down in Baltimore. Obviously the more trains that we run from there, the more there is a need to expand this station, have more platforms, and then we can spread the trains out more evenly. I really don't like to have a station have more than, say, 10 or 12 trains docking on it. Obviously it depends how far the journeys are, as in how often they turn up at the station. Right, so we've got our Q2 in, which is actually less than Q1, but that's just because, as I say, at the beginning of the game there, we sort of flooded we flooded our cities with lots of resources, and them resources are now getting pretty much full. Q3 I would expect to be significantly bigger than Q1, but we'll have to wait and see for that. Right, so I think that's it for this episode. We've got our expansion towards Albany. We're setting up our trains. Next job will be to get to Syracuse, and we will then probably add in this corn and get a train running corn into New York and Baltimore, and that will help with those cities' growths as well. Right, all the best then. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.